Hello and welcome to the People Strategy Forum. Today's guest doesn't mince words. Working hard alone won't get you where you want to go. So, Michael Wenderoth is an executive coach, a Stanford MBA, and host of the 97% Effective podcast, and the author of Get Promoted, his new book. He challenges a common belief that promotions come with they don't come from just merit. They come from how we develop relationships. We need to understand the power dynamics of organizations, the politics and influence. They're all essential tools when used ethically. So his three-step rock, map, and snowball strategy offers a principled path to building credibility, expanding your network, and gaining momentum without compromising your values. So if you're leading people who deserve to get to the next step, or wondering how to build a culture that enables your people to do their best work so that they can get promoted, this episode will change the way you think about success at work. So let's welcome Michael Wenderoth. Welcome, Michael.
Sam, absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And so I'm super excited about talking to you about this topic because, as one of the things that I focus on in organizations is ensuring that they have a robust job and compensation structure. And one of the things that's important with that structure is ensuring managers are using that job structure to help develop people and promote people as effectively, because we all know that hiring from the outside is not always the best idea. We want to look at our internal talent pool. So the first thing, Michael, before we get kicked off on this, I would just like to learn a little bit more about your personal journey. How did you get to where you are today, and what really drove this passion around getting people promoted?
Yeah, so to laser right in on how I became an executive coach and why this particular area around power and politics, something that I dismissed, and I think most people do early in their careers. There was a moment. I think for a lot of us, there are these moments, but I remember it very clearly. I was working and living in Shanghai in China at the time, and I got a call from my friend Matt, not his real name. But Matt, and I was thinking this is going to be celebration, because Matt is the kind of guy, the kind of person that I think we all know, right? The hard worker, super smart team player. You know what everyone believes is the leader that we want, right? So I think most of us who knew him saw him as a future CEO. And so I thought, this was about 15 years into my career as well as his, that this was going to be like a celebration call. It was the opposite. So it was a call, the kind that you don't want to have. And I think a lot of us also see this, right? As we move up, the air gets thinner in organizations. But Matt had essentially been ousted. We could call it derailment, right? In HR speak. That he essentially kind of got outmaneuvered. He called it a power play, politics at work. And I mean, when you get derailed, right? You've burned up a lot of our identities with work. I could see that it was, and over the next couple of months, right? It really affected family life and other things that were going on. But essentially I was like, well, what happened? And he mentioned these things around power at work, politics, outmaneuvered. And there was a key thing that he said, which was, and I think most of us saw this in him, right? I've done all these things, what the leadership and the training, even the company training taught, right? Transparency, teamwork, showing vulnerability, etc. But I got ousted, right?
Yeah.
So what went on? And, that made me pretty furious that this could happen to a great individual. And then I kind of took a step back and looked, and I realized, hey, people had worked for me, peers, right, from college, even inside my company. Like, it wasn't always the smartest, hardest workers who were getting ahead. In fact, it was this other group, which we can talk about, sometimes aggressive, very well connected, big communicators, etc., who were. And, something else that Matt said, and we'll come back to this. He said, I feel like the peer who got promoted or outmaneuvered me was operating by a playbook that I feel like I never got.
Oh,
And that led me, and that's kind of the central question to me, was like, what were some of these good people like Matt? And I felt like my career was good, could have been better, I think, missing. And why weren't their bosses or orgs seeing this or even promoting them, to your point there in the introduction? So we can talk about, I looked deeply at research around what really moves people up. And I thought, a few years later, when I moved out of my corporate career into coaching, I want to help good people figure out what they're getting wrong or what they're missing to get ahead.
right.
And so that's the focus of my coaching, those who are stalled or feel frustrated, that they're not moving up or they're not having the impact they seek.
Well,
And
I'm
helping
glad
them
there's
navigate organizations.
people like you out there to help good people get ahead. And so I would love to discuss this from two angles. One from the company's perspective, and the other is from the individual's perspective. And so, but let's start with the individual first.
Sure.
And so, in your particular story that you mentioned, there's things that we should all be doing as professionals to ensure that we are advocating for ourselves, to ensure that we're positioning ourselves for success. And so when you start an engagement with a particular individual that is looking to get promoted in their career, how do you typically frame this? What is the framework that you use to help people get ahead?
Well, first is kind of analyzing what's going on or what brings them into the situation, and so what is going well for you in your career or what is not. And a lot of times this is where I feel like my hard work's not being recognized. I feel like some other savvy players are moving ahead. And so it's surveying kind of how they're feeling and what things are working or not working for them. At the same time, having them do, a scan. I know we were talking before, when you're looking at compensation, you'll do kind of a scan of the environment in the larger industry, but having them to look not at what organizations are very good at saying certain things will be promoted.
Mm-hmm.
But and it doesn't have to be a complex exercise. Listeners out there can do this very quickly. Take a look at the last 5 people, right, in your kind of division or group that have gotten promoted. How did they get there? What are they like? How do they spend their time? What were the drivers of that? And to see if there's a match. Most often there's a mismatch with what they're being told will be promoted. And so if you scan the environment first, is just to say, where are you at? What's working? What doesn't feel working for you? And a lot of times this will boil down, particularly with the clients who come to me, they'll say, I feel like these individuals are good at politics. I don't want to play that game. It's kind of like what Matt said. I just don't do that. And it's a little like sticking your head in the sand, because politics are like the air we breathe. And particularly as you get higher, you have to work through other people. Oftentimes, you don't get to choose them,
Right.
in organizations. And so you will need to find a way to operate with them and to get things done, and to understand also, it's not, I have a lot of people who are like amazing bosses with their teams. A lot of times it's not your team that promotes you, right? It is your boss or key stakeholders. So what do they know about what you do, right? If you're head down at your desk, people may not see the work you do, while someone else who has more questionable ethics may be taking credit for it. So that's a kind of initial scan to say, where are you at and how do you think about power and politics? Because we can talk about it. It's there. And if you've simply got a negative view of it, you might need to reframe how you think about it, because power and influence are the things that get things done.
Right. I mean, I think that, we can label it as power, influence, politics, label it as politics. But the bottom line is these are people we work with, people that just in our daily lives, if we just think about our personal lives, there's people that are main stakeholders in our personal life. There's people that are influencers in our personal life. And frankly, we need to make sure that we're having these effective relationships with these individuals to ensure that we can live life well and without stress. The same thing, I imagine, goes with work. We need to understand who our those major stakeholders are, our colleagues that we need to get along with on a regular basis, and those influencers out there that can make a difference, or either give us a voice, an advocate, or be an influencer, right? To just how should individuals that are looking for career progression identify these individuals, and what should they do once they've identified them?
Yeah. And I call this, there's kind of a larger framework with which my book is written,
Mhm.
which is the rock, the map, and the snowball, which is, if you break this down, it's the rock is get real, the
Yeah.
map is get strategic, and the snowball is get doing. And so the rock is paying attention to things that are going on and the hard evidence about what propels careers. But here, the map, and that's really where you're going at, and is absolutely critical. Most people don't look at how they spend their time. And are you spending time on things that move the needle? You may be spending it down in the organization, but is really to take a snapshot, right? I call it the power map. It's a tool that's on my website, but I elaborate a lot on the book, is to say, who does decide? Who does hold influence? Unfortunately, despite saying we're all egalitarian, organizations still are hierarchies. There is power that resides with certain individuals. Decisions are made by people.
Hmm.
And so you're better off, rather than thinking there's going to be a vote, there's almost never a vote in an organization, is to understand how someone will make a decision based on what. And if we don't have to go into this in depth, but really map things out, you kind of see the forest. It will generally come down to, you'll start to see channels of what I call influence conduits,
Hmm.
right? These individuals, there is someone on the committee who has outsized influence, who will make the promotion decision. Or there's 6 people in the room, 3 of whom really don't matter. Or funding, right? Whatever you want to take
Yeah.
in terms of your goal there, is to map that out. You'll see the conduits, and then you'll see certain assets, right? What do those people care about? If
Hmm.
you're working on things that at the end of the day haven't moved the needle for those individuals, right? Typical, right? Sales wants to see numbers, right?
Yeah.
If you're not moving something that impacts them, it's naturally going to get discounted. And so to think about those assets that help you navigate this forest. And I like to say, you can have a true north of like the things that you want to get done. But if you're really not mapping out where the minefields are, where the shortcuts are, who can be of help to you, who has a voice, you're in for a very rocky road.
Yeah. And so it's identifying those individuals, making sure that we're showing those individuals that have influence value and what we can deliver. Usually I almost think of it as something like building a business case for yourself. I mean, showing how you can increase value and therefore help people be successful, help the organization be successful. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a thing we talked about. And I just want to reiterate here that it is about, being agentic, right? About, making the case. This isn't, and I think people can look back, just a few minutes ago in our conversation, if they're thinking, oh, you've got to like self promote, you've got to be the loudest one in the room. That's not necessarily the case. You can do this in a very ethical, tasteful way, having regular conversations with your boss, not
Hmm.
relying on your boss to sift through the 2 pages you send over. It's to distill it down. Here's the things that I've done and the impact. And to start to have that conversation. What does it look like to go to the next level? Too many people, are reviewed once a year. And so taking charge of your career, we can talk on the flip side of this of what organizations can do. I mean, is really critical. And to the point which other people, okay, this is very self-serving. It's all about me. I see certain groups that I work with, feel real icky about that. But I think the question people need to ask themselves is, if you do those things, who else benefits?
Yeah.
Typically your team, right? You and I were talking about why most people leave organizations. Well,
Hmm.
they're got nowhere to go, right?
Yeah.
And so if the boss or the manager, the leader of that group is not getting resources, is not moving ahead yourselves, generally your top people aren't going to see much daylight advancing their own careers. Where are they going to go? Outside.
Right.
And so it behooves you to build influence, get resources, and develop your own team. And I think that's what powers a lot of the best people, thinking about they're doing these things not just for themselves, but for larger causes.
Okay, so let's talk about that on the company side of things. And so, one we were just talking about how people should be advocates for themselves and set expectations with leadership and their managers about what they want as far as their career progression in the future. The next is, how can companies facilitate the discussion? How can they create those paths, those career paths that engage people and retain them long term, and have those regular conversations? What does that look like in your world, Michael?
Well, first is this question, which I ask a lot of the people that I coach. How often are you having those conversations? Not the one-on-one update, show up and throw up, and we're just talking about work. We're talking about, hey, where do you want to be in 1 year, 2 years? Has your manager ever asked you that?
Yeah.
Right? It's a good question to first ask your manager that, right? Because then you know what motivates him or her and where their ambitions lie. But having, first of all, the regular conversation, right? And it is not going to be a career development conversation every week, but every month, every quarter, where you're able to voice some of what you desire, your ambitions, but also getting some feedback, right? Because again, if you're not getting projects that are meaty, that will have impact, if you're
Hmm.
doing all the admin work or things that doesn't matter, at the end of the year, right, on your eval, it's like, well, these things didn't move the needle. So that's
Yeah.
a disappointing conversation. So that frequency part, and then starting to engage your boss, which is tricky, okay, because there is this power dynamic going on as well. And, a lot of people I find are afraid, like, oh, it's too bold of me to say I want to be promoted.
Hmm.
And start to ease into that conversation. But it's one you do want to have if that's what your goal is. But having those conversations, and this is where building, probably the number one person you want to have a relationship and build with is your boss.
Yeah.
Is your boss, right? They are the ones who are going to be evaluating you. And we can talk about all the bias, right? If they're predisposed to you, they're going to start to see you through the halo effect, which means it's going to influence positively their reviews. They will discard certain information. And so build that strong relationship.
Hmm.
How many people, you've had a long corporate career. I did. People out there, think about, like, hey, some of my best reports came to me and said, what's your pain point? What can I help you with? Those things can go a long way to starting to build that relationship. But then take, an analysis, right? If your boss is never giving you stretch roles, is never asking these questions, it may be a sign he or she doesn't really have much of your career growth in mind.
Yeah.
And so there can be another strategy that we talk about too, but really critical to have the frequent conversations.
Yeah, I like that, the aspect of the frequent conversations. I know that I was just talking to an employee of a company I was interviewing, and they mentioned that they have promotional opportunities or discussions every 2 years, and I was like, wow, that's crazy, And when we just think about it, having it on a yearly basis, that seems not good enough. I mean, you have recency bias and so forth. So I'm often thinking that these discussions should be at least twice a year, and then having development discussions in between them. So if you're having a quarterly cadence of talking about career development, and then what you need to do to develop on the next quarter and so forth. I mean, that seems like a more free. Is that frequent enough on a quarterly basis to think about development in career?
Yeah, I think quarterly or even more frequently,
Yeah.
at least having the one-on-one cadence where you're also getting some feedback. It doesn't always have to be a career development discussion,
Right.
but that feedback is really, especially in your first 90 days, you're getting to know the organization. That's a perfect opportunity to kind of calibrate.
Hmm.
How's that going in this meeting? How am I showing up here? If your boss isn't proactively doing that,
Hmm.
you need to ask. Right? Because you don't want to get 6 months in and realize, hey, they viewed you as doing things terribly.
Yeah.
So that frequency, I think, and I've clients, I have one who in his previous job kind of terrible at this, or the organization was terrible at this. And so right away in his first 90 days was having that cadence with his boss, setting that expectation. We're going to talk about career growth. He needed to prove things
Mm-hmm.
early on, but then it becomes built in.
Yeah.
And I mean, fantastic relationship. And that, boss has shown too that she wants to give him visibility, stretch roles,
Yep.
and within 9 months, he's got now reports and huge visibility on certain projects that go all the way up to the CEO.
Well, one thing you mentioned just a moment ago was the power dynamic and how some employees may feel uncomfortable with raising certain issues as far as career development and promotion and so forth. It seems like then employers and managers and leaders should be initiating these conversations to say basically, hey, it's okay to let's talk about this. And in a situation like that, how should managers and the employees prepare for that interaction? What should be done?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's first start with the manager.
Mhm.
I think most managers tend to forget, right, that there is a power dynamic.
Yeah.
So, them asking, what do you want? Right. And the employee may not know exactly what they want, particularly if they're new. Or, where do you want to be in 2 years? And for the employee to say, I want your job might be a
Yeah.
little bit bold.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think you have to ease into that and overuse psychological safety, safe space, etc. But, it's one thing to start to say things. I think bosses also need to model, right?
Mhm.
That you say something, I'm not going to cut your head off. You say something, I'm not going to bring that in the next review and saying, you looked uncertain when you
Mm.
brought that information. So for bosses to first realize that there is a power dynamic and to then to ease into that. And I do say, hey, I remember, early in my career, my best bosses, something I modeled was, where do you want to be in 5 years?
Mm.
And, let's look at ways and, to set up that path that aligns with the things the company wants to do. That's on the manager side. And then to set up kind of the frequency of the feedback.
Right.
And I think too here, there's a piece of, we've lived for a long time kind of in a touchy-feely world of, right, hard feedback. You can still be empathetic, but you can give direct feedback. And I think most people want that and crave it.
Right.
And so being able to give really pointed, crisp feedback that will help people.
Mm-hmm.
Too many people get this vague stuff, right? You're not showing up like a leader. You're communicating. Well, what aspect of it, if you can be more specific, helps.
Yeah.
On the employee side, I think we talked somewhat about that, but I think it's, giving some thought as to where you want to go and the things that you want to work on. Because if you say nothing, you may get nothing, right? Or you
Yeah.
may get, while someone else is more assertive, and let's not say aggressive, let's just say assertive. Hey, these are the things I want to do. I really want to run that project. More likely, right? If you're both equally talented, that person's probably going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you do need to kind of speak up for yourself, give some rationale or reasons. But if you just stay silent and you just assume that people will see things, and this is the problem, right? Bosses are not thinking about you this much.
Yeah.
You got,
So
5 to 8 reports. You've got 1/5, if you're lucky, of their time. Attention.
right. So what I often find is that sometimes managers are reluctant to have conversations around promotions because they're thinking like, well, this person, I need this person on my team. If we promote them or they move somewhere else in the organization, I got a hole I got to fill. And so
Yep.
that gives them that. And so they like to avoid the conversation. The other thing I hear is that managers is like, well, this person is not ready for promotion. It's like, why should we have a discussion? They're not even ready. And so forth. But what I often challenge is that even if a person is not ready for promotion, that means they need to have a conversation about how they can be proficient and competent in their current job.
Right.
And give them that guidance so that they can move along that path for promotion, enabling their success. And so I often find that as a big driver in ensuring that managers are having these important conversations.
Yeah, the worst you can have is you get to that annual review and it's a total surprise, right? If you're doing this frequency, it's not a surprise. You know where you stand. And it's a very natural. I know most managers hate that. I used to hate that conversation. And so you're going to drop the bomb on someone, you know, drop it earlier and get it out there.
Hmm.
And then, of course, HR probably wants that stuff documented if it's in a, this person's not working out situation. Um,
Yes. So let's get into a little bit more on the. You were talking about the politics and the ethics around this. So what typically happens in organizations where their politics is an issue, and how should that be navigated? What are the most common situations, and how do we navigate?
so let's just start, I mean, by what we mean by politics. And it's simply, how things get decided and get done. All right. Again, politics could be voting, right? But it very rarely is an organization. Could be consensus, also rarely happens. And so understanding that, where people may be competing over scarce resources, you know, at odds, sales and marketing, right? Long term, short term, maybe just set up for conflict. And so politics is nothing more than the way things get resolved.
Hmm.
And I think if you can, similar to power, first think about, like, I have a little exercise in the book where you think about all the adjectives and things related to politics.
Hmm.
Most people will come up with brown nosing, backstabbing.
Yeah.
These are the extreme. Okay. These are the extreme. But if you think of it simply as influence, persuasion, creating consensus, or being able to get things done, right? Um, it changes it, right? And in fact, I think I have found a lot of engineers when they start to think of it more as a game, and there's humans right in the game who are deciding, who have these natural biases, they actually kind of warm up to it and they say, okay, it's just a matter of navigating this. I see some of the almost looks like engineering on the board behind you, Sam, but made me think about that. So first of all is this notion of don't just throw away politics because of your negative associations with it.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then secondly is kind of realizing it is by which things get done, going back to our map. And, you know, if there are certain people who decide and they need to be influenced or aware of certain things, then if you do want to get things done, right, it behooves you to know that's how the system is operating.
Yeah.
If we know that, how many times have people come into a meeting and the decision was already decided,
Right.
right? Because there was the meeting before the meeting.
Yes.
And, this is a typical one, right? I was like sideswiped. I had no idea. Well, you probably should have an idea because most of these meetings are scripted, right? Or you have allies, you have mentors who kind of feed you in on how things operate. And in that particular scenario, which you see a lot, okay, there may be some politicking,
Hmm.
right, to influence people or those who might have sway. Or, another typical one is I brought the plan in and it was shot down. Well, maybe if you had also had some meetings before the meetings and gotten buy-in or advice or integrated that into your plan before you brought that in, you would have had allies already in the meeting.
Right.
So this is one example of kind of politics at work. And then we can take this in other areas of kind of obtaining resources, building relationships, right, with stakeholders.
Right. Well, I'd love to talk about that because one of the new elements in work life is there's just more remote work, more hybrid work, and old school managers have a bit of a bias. If I see you, you're more apt to get promoted.
Yeah.
So how do people that are work remotely or in a hybrid environment stay visible, stay relevant, and be on that promotion track?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is fantastic question. Obviously, there was remote work before COVID and the pandemic, but then it kind of became accentuated. And now it's the new normal hybrid remote. some places are going back to work, et cetera. But there's substantial evidence, right, that proximity to power centers, the ability to build relationships with people matter intensely. And in fact, about a month or two, I reposted, I am a kind of geek looking at the research, some great research that came out of the Netherlands, which showed on Zoom calls, if you were not visible, your face, right? I had it turned off here. People didn't think of you as much as a leader.
Yeah.
And of course, most people get promoted and rewarded, right, because they look like a leader or they have some visibility. So the net, we could put that in the show notes, is to be aware, right? Your actual physical visibility does matter. And that's not even being in person.
Yeah.
So I think people need to realize that this is important. And I see some of it to this point around companies is interesting as well. This was a little post-pandemic where the company was all remote. And I know we have some companies who do that. They had interesting, she told me that my client at the time says, oh, we're having next month is our on-site. I was like, you're on-site? And she said, yeah. Like, because we're all remote, once a quarter, we go to a cool place. That time was in Barcelona for like a 3-day team building, but also we work together. I thought that was brilliant in the way that company was setting it up, thinking about these bonds really do matter. But the visibility here, I think if you are remote and you're hybrid, it behooves you, unless you're well established in the organization, to look for ways that you can have some of the physical encounters, right? Don't underestimate, especially if you're new, getting over to meet people in person.
Yeah.
You can do some of that through Zoom and hybrid with your video on, to our point before. But really, really essential. That being said, I'll kind of say a flip side here too. The Zoom in some ways can be an equalizer. And I saw the flip side as well with clients, which was, hey, I may be shy and like a little bit, when I meet, executives in person, stumble over my words. Well, so some of those clients, Zoom gives you the ability, you can like set up so you look better, right? Like if I turn my lights away here, I'm looking like really like ghost-like, right? Or if I'm moving this, I look really odd, right? I've seen a lot of engineers, or I'm in a messy background. So pay attention to those things.
Yeah.
And I kid you not, right? One of the, my clients said, during the pandemic, I'm getting a lot more offers. And I said, that's interesting. What's going on? He said, well, all the interviews are by Zoom. And I think they think I'm like 6'6". The guy's actually like 5'3".
Yeah.
And so again, these are some of our biases at work, but ways that you can, and I'm not to say script things, but like you could put little Post-its up with your key talking points. And so that you don't want to over rely on that. But I think that in some ways there's advantages. So every medium, look to what may be advantageous to help you and address some of these disadvantages, like get yourself in the office periodically. Build that in when you're signing on.
Yes.
Quarterly meeting.
Well, the other thing, Michael, is that the world is changing pretty quickly. There's artificial intelligence is kind of working its way into every facet of the workplace. From in HR, from talent management and the compensation and so forth. And so, where do you see artificial intelligence working your way into promotions and visibility of people?
I think it's like any other tool. It's a very powerful one. And we had a fantastic conversation. Too bad we didn't record that beforehand, because I think you've got some great perspectives on this as well. What I would say, in terms of promotion, and we can look at it from different angles, but first of all, I think we're not always aware of things going on, and this is where coaching, helps. When I'm working with a client, it's a space for them to, how's that working, right? It's a non-judgmental one. It's not with a peer or a boss who may be, seeing things, and they can kind of play with options, talk to someone who also, knows some of the evidence or has techniques that they can use or adopt. But, and I'm, very open to this, AI is actually now, there's interview coaching. There is, just like you would watch a video of yourself, AI can kind of like point out these things, or, hey, here's questions, right? that when you're going in to present to senior management. Now, generally, I think the great individuals will have prepared that in advance themselves and thinking
Yeah.
through it. But this is a way also, if you're tunnel vision, what might come out of, put it into ChatGPT.
Mhm.
And I think likewise on the other side with bosses, I'm just excited about how it's being used. I think we need to be careful with it, but can do scans, right? I know a lot of meetings are getting recorded. Well, that would be useful to a manager if they realize, you always seem to be deferring to one individual. You're not getting the wisdom of the crowd.
Right.
I used to do that with teaching. So to kind of look at, am I calling on certain individuals? How do we get this, which may reflect biases or the way you run a meeting as the boss. And to say nothing of, right, here's ways that could have been expressed more crisply.
Mhm.
And it's not to say you have to be kind of careful. It gives you a lot of garbage back. It's getting better every day. But I think those are powerful tools. Let's embrace and experiment with it. But I would say, and I'm, an AI system, right, is trained on something. So if it is inherently trained on things that are full of bias,
Right.
This is what leadership looks like, banging on a table as an extreme example. Well, then it's going to discount kind of the milder or more gentle, forceful people, right? And again, I'm giving that as an extreme example, but for us to be thoughtful and still not just seed it all, like AI is going to boom, pump it out, and we're going to follow it.
Right.
Use it as a sparring partner. I think that's the way to go with it and learn it. I mean, it is here. It is everywhere.
Yeah, so we're just hoping AI is not being trained on some of those workplace comedies out there, right? Office Space and in the office. Yeah, that'd be a bad situation. But
well, if that was the case, right, Sam, I think we would have lots of work. if every organization was working like The Office, that would be a fun one to. Between that and Succession, right? We'd have a field day.
Yes, for sure. But yeah, I do I see these new tools coming out where can enhance the coaching ability. People can, like for instance, these recording tools are you can record a meeting, a sales meeting, and then get feedback on how well you did on that sales call. Or same thing be done, as you mentioned, with managers or an employee that's thinking about having a hard conversation with their manager on whether it's promotion or performance or whatever it may be. I think is a good tool for the future. The other thing I am seeing is that there's tools out there that can help monitor the workplace skill sets, so that to see if employees are increasing their skills, and so I think that's some of this is workplace monitoring. It can feel really uncomfortable for companies and people, and in other situations it can be in places that show opportunity and remove bias. So I think the future is going to we have to handle it carefully and understand how these tools are used, but I think there's opportunity there if they're used effectively.
Yeah, and that makes me think too. I mean, as a reflection, right? How my kids are starting to use it, right, in high school as they move to college. But we obviously live in a lot of echo chambers, right? And we know that the algorithms send us back information. And I think this is probably the most dangerous part, right, of kind of losing our own ability to think and see from different angles. And I know that we've tried to treat this thoughtfully, bringing in different views, but I think a lot of in coaching is kind of getting people to expand and see different ways of thinking. And so I think one of the number one things you can do with ChatGPT is to say, hey, this is my point of view. What's the contrarian, right? Or what's the evidence-based information that would suggest the opposite, right? Too much we're reading stuff that validates what we're thinking and not doing enough of looking at, hey, what's the evidence on the other side that I should be thinking? That's where you can go down a massive rabbit hole, unless you're using it in that way. And I find it very effective, right? I want to read people who I don't agree with, who have evidence-based but interesting views on how organizations should be run. So
Yeah, I think it's increasing the bar on all of us. I mean, and we're thinking about how we should brainstorm before meetings with others, and preparing and so forth. I think it's an important tool to work with and ensure what we're harnessing. So, Michael, as we kind of come to the top of our conversation here, what do you think is the most important thing that leaders should walk away with from this discussion?
The first and foremost is to really pay attention. Is connected to this last comment about how organizations in general, but in particular yours, actually works, right? What are you actually promoting? What are you modeling? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis, right? Versus the slogans that you put up there. And I think, and this is where, right, we go back to my story of Matt. And when I got very frustrated, I am a super geek. So I wanted to read academic research, which most people don't look at. But it was surprising to me that, wow, stuff starting in the 70s really explained that, hey, people who are hyper networked, who have visibility and brand, strong communicators, or that executive presence, they're the ones who are rising. I mean, there is evidence around this. And so I think a lot of people don't pay attention to that and instead are taking in the TikTok influencers who say things we want to hear. A lot of it's very cliche or based on one person's anecdotal evidence. And that gets spread around even faster now than it did in the past. So paying attention to evidence, I think, is first and foremost honesty, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're all not perfect, but it's like if you're a surgeon, you want to understand how the body is operating, right? If you're going to go do an intervention, okay, it's not operating optimally. Let's go in and do an intervention, and therefore, right, we're doing that based on judgment versus what some quack told me. And I think that the truth may hurt, right? Is Gloria Steinem said, the truth will, set you free, but at first it'll really piss you off. And, we're all imperfect, but I think everyone wants to have better organizations. And we do know that it is these, leaders who take in other people's advice, who are not narcissists, who lead the best organizations. But, look at the evidence, they're still the ones who typically are getting promoted.
Yeah.
Okay. And they tend to lead organizations. There are situations where they're valuable, but a lot of them will leave their organizations down the crapper. And so take a hard look at your organization. And, from there, I think you can identify, some systems and things you do with compensation that, are going to be wins, or even certain things like how you run a meeting, how you make sure people are aware of opportunities, how you create sponsorship and networks in large organizations. That's the stuff that helps people.
So, Michael, what's a lot of our leaders out there think I want to learn more and get a hold of Michael. How can they do that best? And then what is next for you this year?
So following me on LinkedIn and my website, which is Chang Wenderoth, Chang, the Chinese last name, not change. So CHANG, Wenderoth.com is my website. That's pretty much where all my resources, sections of my book, podcast, et cetera, 97% effective. That's the primary mediums to reach me. And in terms of what's next, I would really say it's, improving organizations one hard truth at a time.
Yeah.
And that's why I've really welcomed and thank you, Sam, and the stuff you guys do with your podcast of bringing on different speakers. It's what I do with my podcast as well. People need to hear from different people in different ways. And if that message gets through, hey, find someone who can help you and work with you, or take a couple takeaways that will help you in your organization. That's what's next. One hard truth at a time.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael, for sharing your wisdom on the show today. I really appreciate that. So for all those listeners out there, we'll see you next week on the People Strategy Forum. And if you like this episode, please go down and like and subscribe on YouTube or your favorite social platform, wherever you're watching us at. And we'll see you soon. All right. Take care.